In just a little over a year, next November, you'll get to weigh in on whether Massachusetts' highest earners should pay more in taxes. State lawmakers today overwhelmingly advanced the so-called Millionaire's tax plan, which means it'll be a question on the 2018 ballot. The proposal would mean an extra 4% tax on any earnings over $1 million a year, and that's on top of the 5.1 tax rate we already have. The proposed constitutional amendment says that all revenues, estimated to be somewhere in the $2 billion range, will go towards transportation and education, but not everyone is on board. Joining me on both sides of the issue are Dan Wolf, founder and CEO of Cape Air and a former Democratic state senator. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Jim.
Chris Anderson is president of the Mass High Tech Council. Chris, good to see you, too.
Hi, Jim.
And in the spirit of full disclosure, a spirit I embrace as infrequently as possible, I should say that I ran the last effort to bring a graduated income tax to Massachusetts in the mid-'90s, and it lost by a narrow 65 to 28 margin. So we got crushed, Senator, not too long ago. Why is this a good idea, and why do you think he can reverse that?
Well, times have certainly changed since when you worked on the issue, Jim. The economy is much more top-heavy. We know we have a structural deficit in the budget. We know we are underfunding our core education, K through 12, by over $1 billion. We have a huge need for early childhood education. We know that. And we know at the high end, at the college end, it's crushing future generations, the cost of education. So there's a need. Just driving up here from the Cape today, it took me an extra hour to get here because of the delays relative to transportation. If we want class mobility and if we want transportation mobility, we need to work on education and we need to work on transportation. And this is a great source of funding for that.
Why is he wrong, Chris?
Because it's unconstitutional. This approach is an unconstitutional approach, unlike the version that we battled over a few years ago.
Yeah.
So the Constitution does not contemplate or permit the use of the initiative petition process to have voters actually set rates in the Constitution and then provide direction as to how those funds are going to be used.
But they're amending the Constitution. This is not a law. If it was a law, you'd obviously be right. Well, you might be right. But it's another constitutional provision that's changing the document that you're citing that says it can't do it.
No, the Constitution governs the process for what's permissible and impermissible to be placed before voters through the initiative petition process.
So what's the problem again? It says what's the problem?
That the question is designed as a tax trap because there's been problems passing this type of graduated income tax in the past. For the first time ever, setting a rate in the state constitution, which, by the way, no other state in the nation does for good reason. The proponents or the drafters of this particular amendment have violated several provisions of the Constitution that govern how this process works.
Yeah, can I intervene with that? Because I understand that on technicalities there are people who are wealthier who are acting in the interests of wealthy people who want to try to throw this out. But, Jim, you've talked on this show many times in the past about wealth and income and how it's concentrated at the top. This is an effort to try to fund much-needed initiatives in the Commonwealth.
But if it's unconstitutional, it's unconstitutional.
Well, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, neither is Chris.
So let's assume you lose that challenge. And by the way, as you're well aware, one of the jobs of the Attorney General is to say a question is not unconstitutional and can't be on the ballot. She said it was, but you may win in court.
Well, last year she said Common Core was permissible and it was deemed unconstitutional.
Well, let's assume for argument's sake that you're wrong. If you're right, it ends the whole thing in court.
Right.
You're wrong on the merits. He's the CEO. He does pretty well and may even have to pay the tax. Why is he off base here?
Well, the CEOs that are united around this proposal are really concerned about the brand that Massachusetts has achieved. We now have one of the most well-respected global economies for innovation and research, and there's a reason for that. Connecticut has gone down a path not too far from us where they've tried to tax high-wealth individuals twice. They can't go back to that well. They're in a fiscal free fall right now, and we're reaping some of the benefit of their errors. But the
CEOs you have, if they had to say, and I know it's not an either or, I care about the highest. You were chair of the Board of Education. You know this.
Right.
If it turns out you had a choice between higher quality schools, so your people are trained for your workforce, roads and bridges that are in good shape, or paying a little bit more in taxes in a high-value state, wouldn't they say, I don't like the taxes, but I sure as hell love the better roads and better schools, wouldn't they?
They do, and access to talent and infrastructure is key to supporting this economy we've got, but not through a vehicle that's clearly unconstitutional.
Well, but if it's not unconstitutional, that'll be decided by the SJC, not you.
Jim, it is what it is.
So how do you want to pay for it, Chris?
It is what it is. We have the 7th highest spending per capita in the country. We have the best performing public education system in the country, except in the urban centers, which would have been benefited by the charter school.
So you're saying that the gap that has been articulated by those who have looked at our education system and the failing infrastructure are not issues. Those are issues that will keep people in Massachusetts.
No, those are issues.
Or
we
have
want the
people leave in
legislature to do their job. We absolutely support, in fact, you probably weren't around, but I've been around long enough to know that the council supports additional revenue sources when combined with reforms to make systems like education, in this particular example, more accountable and more efficient.
What tax do you support?
Back in
this
was back in the early '80s. We advocated, because it's on the record,
How about now? What tax
an additional penny on the sales tax
How about now?
if it would be dedicated to certain education
How about
reforms. We have the 7th highest spending per capita.
So there's nothing you support now in terms of new
No, that's
revenues.
not true.
Can I get
That's
back?
not true.
What is it?
Charter schools would have been a perfect public education solution.
No, I'm asking you, what new revenues, the new taxes is the High Tech Council support in 2017?
Well, I don't want to give it away, but you know there's a health care problem with the Medicaid part of the budget, which
Yeah.
is growing unsustainably, threatening all the things, Dan, that you just talked about. There will likely be, and we will likely support, an additional surcharge on employers for a temporary period while other reforms are instituted, and that's the way the legislature ought to work on these issues.
Can I hold you? I'm shocked that he didn't say the following. Why aren't some people in your income bracket going to say, I can live in places where you don't tax me at this kind of rate? And by the way, I don't know what Jeff Immolt's position is, the soon-to-be outgoing head of GE. I also thought you'd say, we got GE because Connecticut got greedy in terms of tax rates. I mean,
As you know,
that's part of the reason.
Study after study have shown that the type of tax rate we're talking about does not drive wealthy people out. What will drive wealthy people out are inadequate school and inadequate transportation systems.
But on the transportation education, do you not worry? I mean, for example, the legislature today is in the middle, my word, not yours, of gutting the marijuana question. But they can change a law. They can't change the Constitution. Let's assume either one, it turns out this was a bad idea, even if in good faith you thought it was a good idea. They can't change it. And two, what happens? Yeah, we'll give the $2 billion to education and infrastructure, but you know what we'll do? We'll reduce by $2 billion the amount of money we're currently spending, which is permissible under this, I think, constitutional amendment, on education and infrastructure, and divert it to irrelevant things that you don't care about.
Well, look, then we have the argument about, are we so cynical about government that this is just a bait and switch? And I'm not. I spent 6 years in the State House. People there are really trying to improve the education system and really are focused on transportation infrastructure. These two issues will cause wealthy people to leave Massachusetts, a lot more than paying a 4% tax over $1 million. I actually think this is embarrassing. That we have wealthy people in Massachusetts that are actually, in this day and age, given the wealth and income gap and given the needs we articulate, I think it is embarrassing. I almost want to say shame on them.
Before we go away, the 3 Democrats running for the Democratic nomination support the Millionaire's Tax the Fair Share Amendment. Are you running for governor?
Not at the moment, I'm not.
Might
no.
you run for governor?
I have not ruled it out, Jim.
Thank you. Senator Wolf, good to see you.
Good to see
Chris,
you.
great to see you again.
Thank
Thanks so
you,
much
Jim.
for your time.